The voicemail came on a Thursday morning while I was standing in the middle of my fourth restaurant, watching the prep team break down the morning delivery. I had flour on my hands and a clipboard under my arm when my phone buzzed against the stainless steel counter. I almost didn't listen to it. I almost just deleted it the way I deleted the birthday texts and the forwarded memes my mother sent twice a year, as if that counted as keeping in touch. But something made me press play. "Diana, honey. It's Mom. I know it's been a while and I know things have been complicated between us. But your father and I would really love to see you. We think it's time we all sat down together, as a family. Just dinner at the restaurant, nothing formal. Saturday at 6. Please come. We miss you." I stood there with the voicemail still playing the ambient silence after she'd hung up, that awkward recorded hiss before the automated voice told me to press 7 to delete. I didn't press 7. I set the phone face down on the counter and looked out at my prep team, at the gleaming copper pots hanging from the ceiling rack, at the chalk menu board I'd redesigned 4 times before getting it exactly right. And I thought about the last time I'd eaten dinner at my parents' restaurant. It had been 2 years and 4 months ago. Not that I was counting. What changed, I already knew. 3 weeks earlier, Food Network had released a 12-minute feature on my catering company and restaurant group, Hearth and Ember Hospitality. The segment was called The Self-Made Chef Who Walked Away from Her Family's Kitchen and Built an Empire. I hadn't pitched it. The producer had reached out to me after my third restaurant, The Larder, got a James Beard nomination for Outstanding Hospitality. The feature had aired on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning my Instagram had gained 40,000 followers and my inbox had become completely unusable. And now, my mother had left a voicemail. I texted back one line. "I'll be there." For 2.5 years before that voicemail, the silence had been mutual and understood and in many ways peaceful. But it hadn't always been that way. The version of me who arrived in that silence had been 31 years old, holding a resignation letter that shook slightly in her hands because she wasn't entirely sure she was making the right decision. I had spent 4 years working inside my family's restaurant Calabrese Kitchen, a well-loved Italian-American place in the Elmhurst neighborhood that my grandparents had opened in 1987. My parents had inherited it, my older brother had been groomed to run it, and I had slid in sideways as the pastry chef, the youngest, the one who was told repeatedly that she was lucky to have a place at all. I had been good at my job. Better than good. I redesigned the dessert menu in my first 6 months and our dessert revenue increased by 38%. I brought in a corporate catering contract with a law firm downtown that added $20,000 a month to the bottom line. I proposed expanding into a second location, a smaller brunch concept in the Wicker Park neighborhood, and I brought my father a full business plan, projected financials, a lease I'd already pre-negotiated with the landlord, and a letter of intent from a private investor I'd cultivated on my own. I was 29 years old and I had done all of it on nights and weekends while working 6 days a week in the kitchen. My father read the proposal at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. My brother leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. My mother refilled everyone's coffee and didn't look at me. "It's ambitious," my father said, which in his vocabulary meant it was foolish. "I think the numbers are solid," I said. "The investor is committed. The space is perfect. We could have the second location open by spring." "The second location," my brother repeated, as if I'd said something funny. "You want to open a whole second restaurant. A brunch concept, smaller footprint, lower overhead." "Diana." My father set the proposal down. "You're a pastry chef. A good one. But running a restaurant is different. Running 2 restaurants is a different thing entirely. I know that. That's why I built the financials to account for." "You're not ready," he said. Simply. Flatly. The way he said things when the conversation was over. My brother nodded slowly, the way he always nodded when my father spoke, as if receiving a transmission. "You're still learning, Di. There's no shame in that." My mother reached over and patted my hand. "Maybe in a few years, sweetheart." I was still learning. I, who had managed a catering operation that generated more revenue than the dining room. I, who had taken a dessert program that used boxed pudding mixes when I arrived and turned it into something that food bloggers were driving across the city to photograph. I was still learning. And my brother, who had once forgotten to order protein for an entire weekend service and spent a Saturday night serving pasta with apology and complimentary wine, was ready. I quit 6 weeks later. My father didn't speak to me for 3 months. When he finally called, it was to tell me I had made a mistake that I would eventually regret, and that the door was open if I wanted to come back to a reasonable position. Not my old position. A reasonable one, as if I needed to be demoted for the crime of leaving. I didn't go back. What I did instead was sign the lease on a 700 square foot space in Logan Square, take out every dollar I had saved, borrow a careful amount from a credit union, and open a 12-table restaurant called Hearth. No investors. No family money. No safety net. I cooked every night for the first 8 months. I slept 4 hours on good nights. I learned how to fix a walk-in cooler at 2 in the morning by watching YouTube videos in my car because I couldn't afford to call a technician until morning. I ate instant noodles more times than I like to remember, and I told myself every single night that this was temporary, that the work was the point, that I would either build something real or I would learn everything there was to learn from trying. Hearth got a glowing review from the Tribune in month 10. By month 14 I had a waitlist. By month 20 I had enough cash flow to start looking for a second location. I opened the larder 18 months after that, a slightly larger concept focused on seasonal Midwestern ingredients and a tasting menu format. My brother called when he heard about it, cheerful and slightly condescending, asking how I was managing, asking if I needed any advice, calling it my little project twice in a 4-minute conversation before I found a reason to get off the phone. When the larder got the James Beard nomination, I didn't call anyone in my family. I sat in my office above the restaurant with a glass of Burgundy and I let myself feel it completely, privately, the way you feel things when you've learned not to share them before they're safe. My catering company, which had grown out of Hearth's overflow corporate business, was by then operating out of a dedicated production kitchen and doing contracts with 5 downtown companies and 2 museums. I had a business partner named Reese who had come on 18 months in and whose operational instincts I trusted completely. Together we had taken Hearth and Ember Hospitality from a single restaurant to a company that a regional private equity firm had valued 6 months before the Food Network feature. At $22 million. My family knew none of this in any detail. They knew, in the vague way that news travels through relatives who follow each other on social media, that I was doing okay. That I had more than one restaurant now, that the James Beard thing had happened. Though my mother's text about it read only saw the news. Congrats honey, which I read twice and then put my phone in a drawer. And then the Food Network feature aired and the segment title included the phrase walked away from her family's kitchen and the phrase built an empire, and suddenly my mother was leaving voicemails. I drove to Elmhurst on Saturday and I parked a block away from Calabrese's kitchen, and I sat in my car for a few minutes longer than necessary. I had driven a sensible 4-year-old Subaru to the restaurant, not the Range Rover I'd bought 14 months ago, because some habits die hard and I didn't see the point in performing. I had brought nothing with me except my phone and my composure. The restaurant looked smaller than I remembered. The awning was a little faded. The window decals needed replacing. I had noticed, without meaning to notice, that their Google reviews had slipped, that there were several comments in the last year about slow service and inconsistent quality, that the catering operation had gone quiet on their website. I noticed these things because I paid attention to restaurants the way some people paid attention to weather, instinctively and constantly. My father was at the host stand when I walked in, which told me they'd closed the dining room for the evening. The tables were set but empty. My brother was near the bar with his wife, Carla, a woman who had always been cordial to me in the way that people are cordial when they're following someone else's lead. My mother came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face doing something complicated that landed somewhere between relief and performance. And then, near the window, I saw my younger sister Nora, who was 26 and who gave me a real smile when our eyes met, the kind that scrunches up at the corners, the kind you can't manufacture. Nora had texted me 3 times in the last 2 years with no agenda, just checking in, just sending photos of things she thought I'd like, a vintage copper sauté pan at an estate sale, a food magazine with a profile of a chef we both admired. I had texted back every time. Nora was the only one. Diana. My father spread his arms in the way he did when he wanted to project warmth into a room by force. You came. You asked me to, I said. My mother hugged me and she held on a beat too long. The way people hold on when they want you to feel something before they ask you for something. You look incredible, she said. That Food Network piece was just beautiful. We watched it 3 times. We're so proud of you, Di, my brother said. And he smiled the smile that had always made me feel like I was being managed. Are you? I said pleasantly. He laughed a little uncomfortably. Of course. We sat at the big round table in the back, the one my grandparents had always called the family table. My father poured wine. My mother brought out bread and a burrata that wasn't quite at room temperature. A detail that in another lifetime I would have mentioned, and now I simply registered and let go. The conversation moved through safe territory for approximately 8 minutes. The weather, Nora's nursing program, Carla's mother's hip replacement. I watched my father drink half a glass of wine faster than he normally would have, and I watched my brother look at his phone twice under the table, and I waited. So, my father said, setting his glass down. The reason we wanted to get everyone together. I assumed it wasn't just the burrata, I said. My mother laughed, nervous. My brother did not. We've been going through a rough patch, my father said. The last 18 months, the restaurant has struggled. Costs are up, the neighborhood's changed, we've lost some regulars. We had to let the catering operation go because we didn't have the staffing to maintain it. He paused. We need to make some changes, and we've been talking about what those changes might look like. I waited. We've been in conversations with a consultant, my brother said, picking up the thread smoothly as if they'd rehearsed it, which they had. The recommendation is a full rebrand and renovation. Updated menu, modernized interior. The consultant thinks we could reposition as a slightly more upscale neighborhood bistro and recapture the market. That sounds reasonable, I said. The renovation and relaunch would cost somewhere around $650,000, my father said. He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd sat down. We'd like you to come in as an equity partner. Your investment, your name attached to the project, your expertise. Your mother and I keep the majority stake. Your brother continues as general manager. But you'd have a real seat at the table. A real seat at the table. In my family's restaurant. After being told, at 29, with a complete business plan and a committed investor and 4 years of growing their revenue, that I wasn't ready. An equity partner, I repeated. Family working together, Carla offered, as if she were adding a line from a script. What percentage equity are we talking about? I asked. My father and brother exchanged a look. We were thinking 15%, my brother said. For the $650, 15% of a restaurant that their own consultant had apparently told them needed a full teardown and rebrand, in exchange for $650,000 and the honor of having my name on a project I had no operational control over. I see, I said. We know it's a business decision, my father said. We're not asking you to do it purely out of sentiment. We're offering you an asset, a stake in a legacy business with 35 years of history in this neighborhood. A legacy business, I said softly. Tell me, Dad, what were your revenues last year? His jaw moved. We've had some challenging years. Your revenues were down 31% from 3 years ago. Your Yelp rating has dropped from 4.2 to 3.6. You lost the Hendrix corporate account in January, which if I remember correctly was $12,000 a month. I took a sip of water. I do my research. I've been doing it my whole career. My brother's expression shifted. How do you know about Hendrix? Because Hendrix called me, I said. They reached out to Hearth and Ember about taking over their catering contract. We declined because we're at capacity, but I know about Hendrix. The table was quiet. Diana. My father's voice had an edge in it now, the edge that had always meant the conversation was about to change registers. We are your family. We built something here that is worth saving. You built something. I agreed. Grandma and Grandpa built something. The question is what you've done with it. This is exactly the problem, my brother said, and his voice had the tight quality of someone trying to stay controlled. You've always thought you knew better. Even when you were just starting out, you thought. I did know better, I said. I proposed a second location with a complete business plan and committed financing, and you told me I wasn't ready. I left and opened 4 restaurants and a catering company that's been valued at $22 million. I wasn't not ready. I was just inconvenient. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father set his wine glass down with more force than he intended. You want to talk about what happened, my father said. Fine. Let's talk about it. You left. You chose to leave. We didn't push you out. You told me my proposal wasn't good enough, I said evenly. You gave the same answer to everything I tried to contribute for 4 years. My dessert program paid for the new HVAC system in this kitchen. My catering operation was the only thing keeping you profitable in year 2 of the pandemic. I know the numbers because I was running the numbers. And when I brought you a real opportunity for growth, you told me I was a pastry chef and that I should stay in my lane. We were protecting the business, my brother said. You were protecting your position, I said, and I said it without heat, just as a fact, because by now it was simply true and I had no interest in performing anger I had already processed. There's a difference. Nora was looking at the table. She'd been quiet the entire time, and I could feel the discomfort coming off her in waves, the particular discomfort of someone who knows the truth and isn't sure it's her place to say it. Dad wasn't protecting his position, my mother said. Her voice was smaller now. He was worried. We were both worried. About what? I asked. She hesitated. About you. About whether you were ready for that kind of pressure. We'd seen so many restaurants fail. We didn't want that for you. You told my aunt at Easter that I was playing chef, I said. The Easter before I left. You said I had unrealistic ideas about the industry and that you hoped I'd grow out of it before I did something reckless. I was standing in the hallway outside the dining room. I heard every word. My mother's eyes filled. My father looked away. You also called my investor, I said. 6 months before I opened Hearth. Marcus called me, confused, because someone had contacted him posing as a professional reference and had spent 20 minutes on the phone explaining why my business plan was underdeveloped and why he should reconsider his commitment. Marcus was loyal enough to call me and tell me about it. I looked at my father. He recognized your name. The silence at the table was a different quality now. Heavier. My brother had stopped looking at his phone. Dad, Nora said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. My father didn't deny it. He picked up his wine glass and then set it down again without drinking, and he looked at the tablecloth and he said nothing, and in that silence I understood that he had known I knew and had hoped we could have this entire conversation without it being said aloud. I overcame it, I said. Marcus stayed. The restaurant opened. But I want you to understand that I built everything I have not just without your support but against active resistance from this family. So when you sit here and offer me 15% of a business that needs $650,000 to survive, in exchange for my name and my money and my expertise, I need you to understand how that lands. We made mistakes, my mother said. We know that. We are asking you, as your parents, to help us. Not because of the money. Because you're our daughter and this restaurant is your grandfather's legacy, and it matters. I looked at her for a long moment. The little girl who had grown up in the dining room of this restaurant, who had stood on a step stool to reach the prep counter and watched her grandmother roll pasta, who had decided in this very kitchen at 11 years old that food was the language she wanted to speak for the rest of her life. That little girl heard every word my mother said and felt the pull of it, real and physical and aching. And then I opened the folder I had brought in my bag. I want to show you something, I said. I laid a document on the table and turned it so my father could read it. 18 months ago, the building that houses this restaurant was sold. The Carlucci family estate put it on the market after Mr. Family, Carlucci, passed away. You'd been renting from them for 22 years. My father frowned at the document. We know about the sale. The new owner honored our lease. I know they did, I said. I'm the new owner. The silence that followed was different from any silence the evening had produced so far. It was the silence of a room rearranging itself, of people recalculating everything they thought they knew about a conversation they thought they were controlling. My brother's hand was flat on the table. Carla had gone completely still. My father stared at the property deed and I watched his face move through confusion and then recognition and then something I'd never seen on his face before, something that looked like genuine disorientation. You bought the building, he said. I bought the building. It was a good commercial real estate investment in a neighborhood I know well, in a market I've been studying for years. I gathered the document back. I paid $2.1 million for it. At current valuations it's worth $3.8. I have 2 commercial tenants on the upper floors and 1 ground floor tenant. I paused. You've been our landlord, my mother said. The word came out barely above a whisper. For 18 months, I said. The property management company handles the lease administration. I didn't structure it that way to be secretive. I structured it that way because I keep my business and my personal life separate. You were paying fair market rent, and I had no intention of leveraging the situation. I folded my hands on the table. Until tonight, when you invited me here to ask for $650,000 in exchange for 15% of a business that operates in a building I already own. My brother stood up. Not aggressively, just abruptly, the way people stand when their body can't contain what's happening internally. He walked to the window and stood with his back to us. You could have told us, he said to the glass. You could have answered the phone in 2021 when I called to tell you I was opening Hearth, I said. You let it go to voicemail and you didn't call back for 6 weeks. When you did call back, you asked me if I'd thought about coming back to the family restaurant. Nora made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. I'm not here to destroy anything, I said, and I meant it. I'm not going to raise your rent and I'm not going to use the property against you. That's not who I am, but I am telling you the truth about why I can't invest $650,000 in this project. And the truth is this. You are asking me to bet on a team that has never once bet on me. I know what a good investment looks like. I've made enough of them. And this one, structured the way you've described it, is not one. Then tell us what would be, my father said. His voice had lost its authority. He sounded older than he had at the beginning of the evening. I don't know yet, I said honestly. There may be a version of a conversation we could have that makes sense. A real conversation, not a dinner where the business pitch arrives with the bread course. But that conversation would require something that hasn't happened yet. An apology, Nora said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She was sitting straight, her hands in her lap, and she looked at my father with the directness of someone who had been waiting for permission to say something for a long time and had decided the permission wasn't coming on its own. She deserves an apology, Nora said. An actual one. Not a preamble to a proposal. She looked at me then, and her eyes were bright. I watched you do everything right and get told it wasn't enough. I was 22 and I didn't know how to say it then, and I've wanted to say it to you every year since. I'm sorry, Diana. You deserved better from all of us. I looked at my little sister, and I thought about the estate sale copper pan photo she'd texted me on a random Wednesday, and the way she'd written just saw this and thought of you and included 3 heart emojis that she was young. Enough to deploy without irony. Thank you, I said, and I meant it with everything I had. My father was quiet for a long time. My mother was crying with the contained dignity of a woman who had been raised not to cry in public, which she was technically doing. My brother had turned away from the window and was standing with his arms at his sides like a man who had arrived somewhere unexpected and wasn't sure of the protocol. I called your investor, my father said finally. I shouldn't have done that. I was scared. I told myself I was protecting you and I was protecting myself, and I knew the difference even then and I did it anyway. He looked at me directly. I'm sorry, Diana. I'm sorry for that specifically, and I'm sorry for the years of treating your work like it was less than serious. It was always serious. You were always serious. I just didn't want to see it because if I saw it, I'd have to ask myself why I hadn't given you more. The room was very still. I had wanted that apology for a long time. I had wanted it so precisely that I could have described its exact dimensions, the specific words, the admission of the investor call which I had never been sure he would acknowledge. And sitting here receiving it, I noticed that it felt different than I had imagined. Quieter. Less like resolution and more like the beginning of something that would take a long time to understand. Thank you, I said. I needed to hear that. What happens now? My mother asked. Nothing tonight, I said. Tonight I'm going to go home and I'm going to think. And so are you. I stood up and I picked up my bag. I'm not your investor. Not right now, not under these terms. But I'm also not your enemy. I'm your daughter and I own your building and we are going to have to figure out how to be in each other's lives from a place of honesty instead of convenience. I looked at my father. That's going to take longer than one dinner. I hugged my mother, and I meant it. And she held on and I let her. I nodded at my brother, who nodded back, a shorter and more sober nod than any he'd offered at the beginning of the evening, I hugged Nora last and she held on the way she always had when we were kids, both arms firm, like she was making a point. Call me this week, I said quietly. I will, she said. I walked through the dining room of the restaurant where I had spent my childhood, past the table where my grandfather had taught me to play cards, past the bar where my grandmother had kept a mason jar of Jordan almonds on the second shelf, past the kitchen door where I had stood at 11 years old and decided what I wanted to be. The restaurant was the same and I was different, and that was exactly as it should be. Outside, the evening air was cool and the neighborhood was quiet in the way neighborhoods go quiet on a Saturday when the dinner rush is ending and the later crowd hasn't arrived yet. I walked to my car and I sat for a moment with the engine off and I thought about the $22 million company I had built in the years they weren't watching. The 4 restaurants, the production kitchen, the 37 people I employed, the Food Network segment that had used the word empire and had not been wrong. My phone buzzed. Nora, I meant what I said. I'm proud of you every single day. I typed back, I know. That's why you're the only one I always called back. Then one more, a few minutes later, from my mother. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. But I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure you know I mean it. You built something extraordinary. You did that. I sat with that for a while. Not because I needed her to say it, not anymore, but because it still mattered. Because it turns out the little girl who wanted her family to see her doesn't disappear just because the woman she became learned to live without them. She just gets quieter. She gets patient. She keeps building and she keeps hoping that eventually, if you build something real enough, the people who should have always seen you will finally have to look. I started the car, and I pulled out onto the street and I drove home through the city I had made my own, past Hearth. With its warm light in the windows and the line of people already forming outside, the larder 2 blocks north, past the production kitchen, where my team would be prepping tomorrow's catering orders, past the building I was quietly negotiating to buy for location number 5. I drove home to the apartment I had renovated myself, in the building I had purchased 3 years ago in a neighborhood everyone said was too early to bet on, which was now one of the most desirable zip codes in the city. I drove home alone and I was not lonely. The girl who had stood in the hallway of that restaurant overhearing her mother call her unrealistic had become a woman who owned the building that restaurant stood in, who employed more people than her family had ever employed, who had been offered $17 million for her company 6 months ago and had said not yet because she wasn't finished yet. She had said not yet. And she had meant it. I parked in the garage beneath my building, sat one more moment in the dark and the quiet and made a decision about nothing in particular and everything at once. Some things take time. Families are not businesses, no matter how many people confuse the two. You cannot restructure them or rebrand them or bring in a consultant to tell you what percentage equity makes the relationship worth re-entering. You can only show up, tell the truth, and see who is still standing when the dinner is over and the real conversation has finally started. My father had called my investor. My father had also said I'm sorry, specifically, without a condition attached. Both of those things were true and I was going to have to hold both of them, not tonight, and not easily but eventually, the way you hold anything complex and true, with both hands and a great deal of patience. I went upstairs. I made myself a cup of tea. I stood at my window and looked out at the city that had watched me build everything I had, quietly and without asking permission. And I felt something settle in my chest that I recognized after a moment as the particular and private satisfaction of a woman who has never needed anyone's validation but is honest enough to admit that sometimes, after a very long time, it is still good to finally receive it.